a key for me in terms of like a lot of things that we've talked about in the program was like, how do you mirror the traits that you want to become? Because it's like, I think that's really important. It's like you have to have good process and then the results will come. And I think you've talked about that with me a lot sometimes as being a student. Is like, there are things you control and there's things you can't control. And it's knowing when you goal set, what are those things that you can control and what are the things that are outside of, of your potential opportunities.
I'm here today with Matt and Matthew. Matt Allen is a longtime student of mine in the Optimizer program. We're going to hear all about your journey, which has now led us to also having a conversation with Matthew Gentile, who is the writer, director, producer extraordinaire that has made the movie American Murder a reality. And today's going to be a really interesting conversation because generally when I do student case studies, it's a one-on-one conversation between me and one of my students. But Matt, of the Matt and Matthew pair, so Matt specifically, when you came to me and talked to me about how you were using the outreach strategies that you had learned to get your film in festivals, and now Matthew is a convert of all this, I thought, how interesting would it be to tell your stories both from the perspective of just a student case study, but more importantly, how the lessons you learned have extended benefits far beyond you and to others that are around you, and now to many other people in both of your ecosystems. So on that note, Matt and Matthew, pleasure to finally have you on the microphone today.
Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So it's always a challenge managing a conversation with more than one guest at a time, because I always feel really bad about how do I make sure the conversation is balanced and not leave anybody out, and who do I start with and who goes next. We're just going to turn it into an organic conversation. But I think the important place to start is the origin of the movie that we're going to kind of center all these conversations around. So I'm going to start with you, Matthew, and I want to talk a little bit more about your journey to become a filmmaker and a storyteller, and where this idea for American Murderer first came from.
Sure. Once again, thank you for having us. Thank you for that info. And yes, we are big students of yours. So it's not just small students. We are huge, Matt especially, but your strategies has helped us tremendously. And I wish I learned them a decade ago, but I'll take them from here on. So starting with my journey, I want to be a filmmaker since as long as I can remember. I'm one of those, who was walking around the video camera at 12, making movies in class and whatever. I always loved movies as a kid, growing up when I was 12. I think my father showed me a lot of movies I should probably not have seen, from like Dog Day Afternoon to The Godfather and Goodfellas, and films that just really spoke to me. I always loved film noir and stories about anti-heroes, as well as stuff like James Bond and those kinds of cool action thriller kinds of things. So, I grew up knowing I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I kind of went in and out of different things as one does through their teenage years in high school. I was into acting at one point, I was into writing. So it was kind of all swirling around, leading me towards directing without me really knowing it. When I was 14 years old, I first had encountered the story that became American Murder because I wanted to be an FBI agent as well, another childhood dream I had. And I used to go on the FBI.gov website. I would look up the top 10 fugitives to see who was missing. And at the time, I was a young teen in like the early 2000s. So, you had fugitives like Osama bin Laden and Whitey Bulger up at the top 10 list. And then you had this guy, Jason Derek Brown, who was a surfer dude with spiky blonde hair and green eyes, just didn't really fit the bill. And his mugshot made an impact on me. It was a visual that just got into the subconscious and stayed there for a long time. Cut to 14 years later, I went to film school at AFI where I met Matt. And, after I graduated, I, had the persistence to make two shorts that did well and the luck to have them be well received. But, putting these two shorts out there on the circuit, and, I was kind of struggling to figure out what my first movie was going to be. It's a very big thing for a first-time director. You have to figure out, what is that first feature? How's it going to announce you? And especially today and even in the last few years, directing jobs don't really come around a lot, especially when you're at the emerging level. It's very hard to get yourself on movies. So for me, I realized pretty quickly that if I wanted to make a movie that was going to be my own voice and was something I wanted to say and was the kind of film really that I wanted to see, I was going to have to write my way into the director's chair, so to speak. And, I was kicking around. I was like, like, what could that first feature be? I had a few different ideas. And, all of a sudden one day I was storyboarding for a commercial that I was going to shoot, that I was directing. And I was drawing out the images on my couch, and I had the TV on, and the face of Jason Derek Brown just popped on my TV. And I just looked at it and I said, oh, this is so weird. And I turned the volume up, and he was covered on the show American Greed, a true crime docuseries. And I just couldn't believe that he was still missing. I couldn't believe that he had eluded capture this whole time, but was this charismatic con man. And as I started to watch the story, I just said to myself, I feel like a movie about this guy is the kind of film I grew up loving, the film I would love to see. And I just became completely obsessed. And at first I thought maybe I would try to write the script on spec and sell it because it might be too ambitious for a first movie. There's kind of like principles of what you should do on a first film. And, maybe don't do something with 27 locations and action set pieces and, an ensemble cast, all these things, which we did for ours. So, we really were, I knew, so at first I thought maybe I'll just write it. But as I wrote it, I said to myself, I have to direct this. There's no way I can let someone else have it. So, I just became really obsessed with it, obsessed with the story, and kicked the idea around. I was lucky to have someone like Matt, who was really in my corner, and Matt and my cinematographer, Khalil Robinson, and, people who just really believed in the project and me as a director. You need that in a collaborator, especially with someone like Matt, who's as an editor just has your back. But, it took a while for it to get off the ground, but I wrote the script, and I want to say in 2018, the first version, and was kicking it around with not much luck and not much response. Not a lot of people were really, interested in doing a true crime film about a bad guy. I just didn't really, it wasn't the easiest sell on paper, so to speak. I went, off not getting the response I wanted. I went and did a proof of concept short where I shot one scene from the movie. And an actor who appeared in that short happened to have a TV show that came out at the time that was quite big on Netflix. And that started to get a lot of interest in the project. And producers were then kind of starting to more come towards me, but some producers wanted it without me directing it. So it was this big kind of mess. It was very hard to, figure out what was the best way to go. And then finally, and I was saying early 2019, two production companies converged on me at the same time about the script. Charlie Picture Show Company and GG Films. And we went through a really lengthy development process. And, where I was working on the script, it was my first time getting paid as a writer, as a screenwriter. And, we were trying to figure out when we were going to go out to cast this movie. After about a year of development, the world shuts down March 2020. And now we're thinking, how are we going to make this movie happen? And we really didn't know. But, in March 2020, when the world shut down, the person I spoke to the most was the man in the box below me, Matt Allen. And I said to him, and I said to my cinematographer, and I said to, my brother who became the composer of the film, I said to everybody who really, my core team, which is really these ones, I said, we are going to act like the movie is shooting tomorrow. And we were going to act like the movie shooting tomorrow. And let's just hole up in our apartments. And whenever we're not doing whatever we need to do to pay our bills, let's just work on this. And it was really cool to see, because with Matt, especially early on in like March, April 2020, Matt came to me. Matt is he's going to give you his background, but he's too humble to say he's a superstar wunderkind, film editor at AFI, who was picked by the top editor teacher to come assist him on a Disney film right out of school, and then won an Zumbrunnen Fellowship that I can't even tell you how few people get this thing. He won this all. He had all these amazing stuff for me where he was like, I could do pre-visualization in my apartment. Like, I won this software from this award thing. We could be designing shots right now. And so, in this pandemic time, and we were just shut down and locked up, Matt and I would come over to Matt's house, on the weekends, and we would pre-visualize the movie, and he got me directing again. And, that energy, that creative spark really kept us going. And then sure enough, the world was still in crazy lockdown, but June 2020, we landed our lead actor after persisting, making offer after offer. We finally found the right guy creatively for the project, and was a good fit in general. And Tom Pelfrey signed on to the movie. And then sure enough, while Matt and I were really keeping this project alive, the project just really started to build buzz and momentum. And after Tom Pelfrey came Ryan Phillippe. Ryan Phillippe brought, got Idina Menzel interested. That led to Jackie Weaver coming on. And before we knew it, we had this amazing cast of A-list actors coming to be in our movie. And we ended up shooting the film in December 2020. And it was a really, crazy, fast thing that, it was a slow burning thing that all of a sudden happened super fast, and that's often a story around why you guys say the 4-letter word without, is that it was like a lot of persisting. It was a lot of being told no. There was a lot of obstacles. And, it was like that after we shot the movie too, finishing the movie and then editing it with Matt and not just editing with Matt, but also, the year after we finished, like getting it out into the world, getting it seen at festivals and getting it seen by critics and getting it, all the movie really, like, other than getting the amazing cast, Matt and I always joke that we really never had a break. Like, it was always like every time we got something, it was like, and now the bar's just been pushed up a little further. And now the bar just keeps getting pushed. And so it was a really, intense, crazy experience, but I'm so glad I got to do it. And I'm glad I had this guy here because we really, he was my partner in crime all throughout.
Amazing. There are about 1.5 million threads that I can pull on this, and we're going to pull on several of them. I'm going to rewind all the way back to the beginning of it first. And Matt, I promise I will get to you in a second and you'll have plenty of time, but there's one additional question that I think is going to really factor into a lot of the things we talk about as far as persistence. What I find really interesting about this is that when I was 14 and I had access to the internet, I was going to boobs.com. And you're going to FBI.gov, right? So what I'm curious about, what specifically was it that the obsession with the FBI and with these agents, and the reason I bring it up and I want to frame it is that it can sound like it's something unique to you, but I think a lot of or most creatives have an obsession or an interest in something, but a lot of times they have a hard time actually turning it into something else. And you said, I want to be an FBI agent, and maybe I'm not going to end up being an FBI agent, but I can combine this passion for this with my passion for storytelling. So what was it specifically about this kind of story that resonated with you?
It's very interesting. I remember my grandpa died when I was quite young, but we were very close. My Italian grandfather, Joseph, on my dad's side, and he showed me 007 when I was, I think, 8 years old. And I remembered loving the romanticism of a secret agent. Now the FBI agents, as I've learned in the years since, aren't exactly quite like Bond, right? Most of them, in fact, are not, there's very few field agents and whatnot, but the romanticism of being an agent, someone who fights crime, crime stories, man, I've been attracted to them since forever. It goes back a really long time. I mean, like I said, my father showed me Dog Day Afternoon when I was 12. And, I always loved the relationship between the cop and the criminal, the sheriff and the outlaw. I also grew up loving Westerns, which probably doesn't come as a surprise. So, gangsters, criminals, like for me as a kid, I wasn't into the normal stuff. Most kids my age were into Pokemon or baseball cards. I was into gangsters, pirates, criminals, con men. That was kind of those were the stories I was just into. And I think, I always believed also in a sense of, I had a strong sense of justice as a kid. I was always someone who said, that's not fair. My mother, being a Russian Jewish mother, would go, the world's not fair. I'd go, that's not fair. I would get really upset when things weren't fair. And I think I saw something in that as, the prototype of the FBI agent was somebody who could bring justice, and I think that certainly is felt in our movie, and I think actually Ryan Phillippe, who plays Lance Lysing, also is very into the FBI website and the top 10 fugitives. I learned. So you are right in that there are a lot of people, creative types, who are interested in this sort of thing. And there's a lot of studies about true crime that I'm learning now. I've been doing some true crime talks. I was on CrimeCon recently. They had me, and they actually say there is a link between true crime and empathy. Like people who are into true crime, like when I remember being like a teenager when I think it was in high school when the Virginia Tech massacre happened. And, there were shootings before that. Now they're unfortunately way more common, but, I remember that being a real watershed moment like that. Oh, like, because Columbine, I was so young when that happened. I remember hearing about it, but didn't really register. And then Virginia Tech, I was like high school, going to college, and then this thing happened. And I remember that was like the first time I ever did like an internet rabbit hole where I was just trying to read everything I could on that case and why did this happen? What, like, how did this kind of thing happen? How did this person snap? And now it's become way more common, unfortunately. But I think there is a link between that, and the interest in true crime, I think, can really apply to anything. It's like, it's characters, it's people. It's like, why do people do what they do? What makes them tick? And I think that's why I love movies. I mean, even like, I think a movie like Lawrence of Arabia, which I saw for the first time when I was told it's my all-time favorite film now. It was not at the time I saw it, because at the time I saw it, I didn't really get it. I was like, what's this guy's deal? Dad, when he showed it to me, he was like, the best movie. And I was like, no, it's not. Now I agree with him. I think it is the best movie of all time. And I've seen that movie 40 times. I still can't tell you what makes that character tick. So I think the detective work of being a filmmaker connects with the detective work of being an FBI agent, because you're trying to figure out, I've recently been offered my first screenplay to direct, and I'm looking at the script right now like a detective. I'm trying to break it down and figure out who these people are, what's their backstory, and why are they the way they are, and what made them this way. And so I think that's just part of the fun of it. I think it connects and prepares you in a weird way.
Well, speaking of what makes people tick, that is what we call in the industry the perfect segue to my transition to the other member of this call, which is the Matt of the Matt and Matthew pair. And Matt, without going too deep into our story, my memory is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you came to me via American Cinema Editors as somebody that was looking for a little bit of guidance and support and just wanted to learn about next steps in your career. And we had a nice little 30-minute chat on Zoom. And then you just saw a little bit of opportunity and you just took everything you possibly could, every resource, everything available to learn and grow. And I cannot get you off my Zoom calls. I mean that all in the best way possible. You are somebody that sees the opportunity and takes it. And if we're talking about this concept or idea of persistence, what I find so interesting and intriguing about the story of both of you is that the vast majority of people that are either in the entertainment industry or frankly in any industry, they would look at something like you did. We're like, oh, this true crime story about Jason. That's really cool. Somebody should make a movie about this. You guys are like, we're going to make the movie about this. And all of these obstacles along the way. So Matt, tell me a little bit more about what it is about either you or Matthew or both of you that makes you the kind of people that instead of saying, I can't wait to see when somebody makes a movie about this story, you know what? We're going to be the ones that do it.
It's a really good question. Yeah, so there's nothing to correct there. You have a lot of really great resources with you and your community and the type of people that are in your community that are very giving, that give advice, whether it comes to things like resumes or you're trying to get that next job interview. So it seemed like a great opportunity to get plugged in with your community, and it's great to be a member of that. I would say in terms of Matthew and me, I think Matthew's got a lot of energy, as you can probably tell on this call. He's someone who really is really great, I think, at the big picture and getting people really excited to get on his team. And he crafts a really great, just a really great team together, as well as he had a really great script. And I think that was kind of the two things for me at the time that really attracted me to like be on this project and really help him get to that finish line. Was the script that he had written. He had spent all this time. I knew about it for quite some time, but I had seen it evolve. And it was something I was like, this is a good script. I can see this play. And it read well, even before he shot it. And he was very passionate about getting really great cast members. And he was just really much a bulldog in terms of the energy that he was providing all the time. And then you just kind of saw all the other people that are starting to come around him. And even during this kind of maybe weird time where it's COVID, we had that persistence. We kept that persistence. And at least one of the early things I was able to provide, Matthew, was previs. And really the idea behind that was one of my first big jobs was working at Disney on Disney's Christopher Robin. And one of my first big job was being an assistant editor during the previs part. So it was on the previs stage, watching this all go down. Again, this is for like an $80 to $100 million movie, where they have all the resources to do that and they're spending millions of dollars on previs. So I'm thinking, how can I partner? I normally work a lot as an assistant editor, I'd spent several years as a high-level studio assistant editor. How do I partner with this indie filmmaker, first-time feature filmmaker, and provide skills that I know from like $100 million movies to this movie? How do I do that well? And Previs was kind of the first thing I thought, oh, I can do this. And so we were able to get a software program that's not the same as what they use on the big stuff. They're usually using something like Maya on the big movies. We were using a program that I highly recommend. No sponsorship deal here at all, but it's called Shot Pro, and it's really good. And we were able to kind of make these really high level storyboards, previs images where you can mess with the lighting, you can have camera moves, lenses, and really got Matthew directing. And he was able to, I think, really hone in on what he needed with his shot list. I mean, we were able to like, okay, I want to spray this scene. Oh, I don't need half these shots now. But we spent all that time sitting in my apartment rather than him trying to figure that out on a set where he's got like 1 day per location. And that was a big thing he had told me, like going into this movie, is like, you're not going to be able to give me much feedback. Like, I'm going to be on a location and then I got to move the next day. So like, if we're missing something, unless it's like an insert or like, you know, establishing shots, I probably can't get it for you. So we had to go in very prepared. And obviously he deviated and the actors brought so much and our cinematographer brought so much and production designer, like it was very much a full team effort. But I think having those kind of initial conversations, particularly because I wasn't on location with them at all. I was back in Los Angeles cutting and they would send me the dailies. And so we would talk over the phone. But I think having all that prep time, we were very much on the same page. And I think that allowed us to have a lot further like cut because we had all those conversations. You have to still do all this work together and you have to be a great partner with the director. But I think one of the things I was most excited by this project was like, how do you take these high level skills, these high level tools that you have on these big movies, and how do you go down to kind of an independent level and you empower these independent filmmakers? That's personally what excites me, because like you work on a couple really big movies and at some point you're like, okay, I know how this goes. But like empowering independent filmmakers as an editor, that gets me excited because you're giving people a shot. And it's like, how do you empower them with like the same kind of tools that the big, you know, $100 million, $200 million people have? It's not necessarily have the same tool, but can you have the same mindset and the same type of prep?
Mm-hmm. So one of the other things I'm curious about specific to your journey, Matt, is that I know that originally this started obviously as just an idea in Matthew's head. Then all of a sudden you get a few people on board, you get a couple of production companies, and eventually get distribution from Lionsgate. But I'm curious, was there a point at which somebody said, and I doubt it was Matthew, but somebody said, wait, hold on a second. We're going to get an assistant editor just out of AFI that's going to be the lead editor of this movie. Did that conversation ever come across at any point from any producer, director, distributor, financier?
I think Matthew can probably speak to that more. I mean, my attitude, he can probably speak to that backstory. My attitude was I was using the previs as an audition because I knew they didn't want to hire me. Like he's a first-time director. They wanting him to hire more experienced people.
They
so I don't know
want the veterans with the first-time directors because they need somebody that knows what they're doing, right?
Yeah. So the previs was kind of my way of auditioning. That was Matthew can speak to what the internal conversations were with the producers. I never really had that conversation with the producer. It was more of like, keep going, keep doing previs, keep being involved with the project. And eventually, like we got to the point where I could get a deal memo, but it was very rocky. And there was points where I'm like, oh, this isn't maybe going to work out. And all the previs I was doing was for free. Like it was just basically, here's my gamble. Matthew is going to get to do this movie. I may not get to do it with him, but at least I've given it a shot. At least I've aired out the towel. I've done everything in my power. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But Matthew can probably also speak to what the behind the scenes conversations that I didn't know about were.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of times, as you pointed out, first-time directors, when they get the big first movie, the producers or the company or, if there's a studio involved, they say, great, we're so excited to have you. We're going to put you with all these people. My producers didn't really do that. They suggested, maybe you want to work with some people who have done a movie or two before. I never bought into that bullshit, because I had seen directors who had made their first movie. I was lucky that, I was one of the younger students at AFI, but it took me a very long time to get my movie. it's taken everybody I know graduated by a really long time to get their movies made. Like, I think mine was like a 4.5-year journey. I think for like, my other friends, 7 or 8 years, and it's nothing surprised me in terms of how long it can take. But, I got to watch a lot of people go before me. I got to watch quite a few, like people in the class above me or even 2 classes above me. So I got to see. And I noticed that there was a unity amongst the people who had kept their teams versus the people who hadn't. The people who hadn't and kind of, and I'm not going to say they sold out. I get it. Like, it's fucking hard. And, so I understand it. I don't think anyone sold out by saying, okay, I'm going to work with someone who did 3 movies. But I noticed that people who did that told me kind of later on down the road, they're like, they were really more the producer's person, the studio's person, and this and that. And, that's not to say you can't work with people who are more experienced than you. Sometimes it's great to. Certainly every actor on this movie was 10,000 times more experienced. Ryan Phillippe's been doing this for 25 years, So there were, people who were, and I love that, but I felt strongly that when it came to my team, I didn't want to go with people who, I wanted to go with my people. Because, when it came to, say, my cinematographer, Khalil Rams, like I've worked with her since, 2016. So having that shorthand on set really helped me and she understood my vision better than anyone. And in terms of Matt, Matt came in, with previs, and that's, he was like, I'm going to bring this to the table. And I was very straight up with him in that. And also with Khalil and everybody who worked in this project, we were like, in that year before, I was like, look, I had in my clause, I had mutual approval on who is going to be my department heads. So that's a good clause to get. It means they can't make you work with somebody you don't want to, but they also get to have their say. So it's kind of 50-50 deal. And, I said to everybody, look, we're going to get close to prep and, I'm going to do my best. Like, we're going to make it happen. And I was a little like sweaty at one point because, when the producers seemed to be cool with my team, but when the financiers were on, we didn't know how involved they would get. But, once I saw Matt in action in previs, it kind of became very clear to me. I was like, there is no way I could not have this guy editing this movie. I don't really care what his past experience is. I just see that this is a guy. And also it's a lot like me. I'm a first-time director. It's going to be his first big movie. It's Khalil's first big movie. My brother Scott, who did the score, it's his first big movie. It's his first movie period. So it's a lot of people coming at it with that. And I think that comes off in the movie. It's the hunger that we have. It's all of us coming in. We're excited. We're ready to do this. And the producers were really impressed by them. They were really excited to see it. And let's be real, they weren't expensive because Matt Allen is the next, Thelma Schoonmaker. So they got Thelma cheap as far as they're concerned, and so I think at the end of the day, it actually was something that really benefited. And as movie costs now have gotten so low on independent films because the budgets just aren't what they used to be, I actually think this might become more of a trend because it makes sense to bet on young talent because they can deliver, most of the time, and it doesn't cost as much. So that's my note to producers who might be listening to this, give the young guns a chance because they're going to work really hard and they're going to try to prove themselves. And that's certainly what Matt did. And by the end of it, I mean, I don't think any of them could fathom someone else doing it. I mean, he really went above and beyond and impressed all of them.
Well, a couple of things that I want to pull out of this that I think are really important. If I step out of the relationship between the two of you and I'm thinking to myself, whether it's an editor or composer, director of photography, doesn't really matter. But in the case of Matt, right, you, Matthew, had such a bond with him and understood that this is my guy and he gets the story. Let's say I had come along, me personally, and it said, hey, I heard about this American Murderer thing. I've got plenty of experience. I'm available. I would like to cut it. What I have on my resume is not going to overcome the emotional bond and the trust that you have with Matt, right? And I think it's important for a lot of people that are putting themselves out there looking for work, whether it's trying to work with either first-time directors or you want to work for big-time directors, big-time showrunners. We always think it's just about the experience on the resume. It's about here are the things that I've done, but personal relationships are at the core of all of this. And the bond was there that you're like, yeah, you can send me Walter Murch. I'd be happy to do a meeting with Walter Murch. Matt's cutting my movie, right?
And I feel that way right now. Is this my next movie?
Although he does kind of resemble Thelma. I don't know. There's something about there. There's a little bit of resemblance there. So I like that. The next Thelma Schoonmaker. Where I want to go next, and frankly, either of you can answer this, but I'll balance it back to Matt and Matthew. If you want to chime in, you guys can banter back and forth. But I'm always trying to understand what is the essence or the inception of a specific mindset or idea that drives everything. And to me, it's pretty obvious. And when you and I had our original conversation, Matthew, I went back to my notes and I had this in giant, bold, all capital letters. And it was the idea that you both told yourselves, this is going to happen. How do you keep going forwards when 1.5 million things happen that tell you, oh, maybe this isn't going to happen? Maybe the universe is telling us, this is a stupid idea. Let's just go give up and work for the man. You have the mindset this is going to happen. That's one thing. How do you keep that mindset when the adversity is telling you otherwise? I'll start with you, Matt, but I'll let you guys both go back and forth.
I think that's a really good question. I think a lot of it was drawing on is honestly mentorship. I think having people that have done it before you that you can rely on, like yourself, or I've been very fortunate to have other ace mentors like Matt Chesse, Kevin Tent, Alan Bumgarn. Like these are big time editors, and you can and I'm very lucky that I can pick up a phone and talk to these people, and you hear their journeys and you're like, okay, they did that. Like they had to overcome these things. Like they had to do this for the first time. Like you always have to do something you've never done for the first time if you want to keep going. So you hear these guys' stories, and I think that was motivating for me of like, okay, these guys did it. They've had these amazing 20, 30, 40 plus careers. And I think that was very motivating to me of like when we would have weird things happen. I mean, it was definitely a shot in the dark. I mean, we're doing this in the middle of COVID. I was concerned all the time in the back of my head that I'm going to get a call from Matthew or someone in the production, like, oh, we have half our movie shot and we don't know when we can go back. Like that was a real concern throughout this film. And then you obviously are working with an independent budget and you have to get very creative in terms of how you finish your movie well. And we had a lot of really great people come alongside us and we're like, lowering their rates, dropping their fees a little bit because they saw the passion and energy and they saw that we were prepared. That's how we were able to overcome some of these budgetary things, is that we knew, Matthew in particular knew what he wanted, and then was able to empower me and the other department heads to deliver very well. So we weren't like taking tons and tons of time that would cost money. So I think those were like two of the big things, is like, again, being super prepared, knowing what you want, but also having people that can help you along the way that have done it before. And that doesn't necessarily have to be the people on your team. It does help. I was drawing a lot of like, okay, I haven't been maybe sitting in the chair, but I've been sitting in the chair next to the chair. And I've seen this modeled several times. So what would they do in this situation? Like, what is the editor that I've assisted for several times? What would they do? What would they do? And you hear people's stories. And we've talked a lot about the power of story. Zack, you and I just in personal journeys. And I would think about like these editors' personal journeys, and you hear them talk about in their Q&As and their interviews. And you're like, okay, I'm on that journey right now. I'm in the process. I'm not at the destination, but I'm on that journey. And we're still in that journey right now. Still very early on in the career. But I think it's very exciting when you get to partner, with people who are taking risks at the independent level, because there are a lot of really cool indie films going on right now. And I think that's the fun, is like finding those new cool and indie voices. And I know from my personal skill set, I'm not a starter, but I'm a finisher. I can take you to the finish line. If you give me the ideas and some of the tools, I can take you there. And I think that's also why Matthew and I complement each other well in terms of our different skill sets.
It's funny, you and I are the polar opposite in that respect, because I am very much a starter and not a finisher, and need a whole support community around me to make sure I actually get something to the finish line. I'll give you ideas all day long. Love the ideas, generate all the ideas in the world. Then I get about 2/3 of the way through and I'm like, all right, now this is just work. I want to create and generate more ideas. And the only reason anything ever exists in the universe that was an idea that it becomes a reality is I surround myself with people that actually help me get it to the finish line. So Matthew, I don't know if you can relate to that, but I would love to know more about how you, when you were confronted with the realities of maybe you're not going to make this happen, you continued to say, oh no, this is going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, you're riddled across the journey with self-doubt and anxiety. Certainly, I mean, this was door-to-door 4-year journey, more when you factor in the distribution part of it. But I'm counting getting the movie made from idea to there, and it was like a college, right? And you kind of grow up through it in a weird way. And for me, I remember like the first year was kind of like, yeah, this is the movie I'm going to make. I felt pretty certain about it. But I remembered there was one, I think a year in, like I sent the script to a bunch of people. I got all passes. Nobody wanted it. I wasn't sure, but I still felt it. I was like, okay, this sucks. I feel the rejection, but I know I have to make this movie, so I'll find another way. And I called my mentor also. Matt and I are both big believers in mentorship and have had the fortune of great mentors. And I have a great mentor, Brian Danley, who's a very prolific TV director, film director. His first movie was a film called Saved that became a huge cult classic. And he always talked about his journey making Saved, which similarly took 4 or 5 years. And he said to me something that really stuck, which was he called me after I got the rejections, because someone I got rejected from was a friend of his who he knew, and he like had hooked me up with. And the guy was like, I like you, but I don't like your scripts. And I was like, okay. And I talked to Brian, and Brian goes, Matthew, I know this sucks. I was there, but I had a belief inside of me all the years that Save was going to get made, no matter what. And I think you have to have that. Like if something like this, knocks your boat down, then you don't want to get back up, then it's like, then you move on and find the thing that does. And I think that's, it's funny because like an idea, right, for a movie, like this thing goes back so far, right? Like when I was 14, I saw Jason's Face for the first time. So it was always in there and it came out, right? And I think that, sometimes when, film careers are tricky, and I was kind of the mindset from the beginning, like, to be a director, you have to self-generate. You have to create your own stuff because people aren't just handing out jobs and yada yada. But with American Murder, I just really felt in my bones and my gut that it was a story that had to be told, and so I had to do whatever I could to get it made. And if it meant finding the right budget for it, if it meant whatever it was, if it meant rethinking it and all this. And the truth is, as a movie over that time, it just what really happened was it started out much smaller and it grew. It grew bigger and bigger and bigger. And I did. And I'm like you in that I'm a starter as well. I have lots of ideas all the time. I can't write enough of them. Like I'm always like coming up with stuff. And I also need people to get me to the finish line. And that's part of why Matt does compliment me super well, because he is someone who's great at finishing things and polishing and the details and all that. And so I know that I need that. But yeah, I think, especially if you're a director, and one thing about directing on Save Silly, we both have a great mentor who is the librarian at AFI. He's no longer there, unfortunately, but his name is Robert Vaughn. And I remember there's one time when I was at AFI, and AFI, we made our thesis films. Matt and I were in different classes, but we knew each other there. And I didn't get the team I wanted at the time, and I was unsure how I would I was kind of one of the picked last films, and I was doubting myself as a result of it. I couldn't get my own script greenlit, and if I had a greenlighting process, and I was in the library one day, just kind of almost like bad mouthing myself. I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do this. Should I even come back? Blah blah blah. I was kind of being a brat. And the librarian calls me into his office, Robert Vaughn, and he sits me down and he says, Matthew, is a nice guy in the world. He goes, if I'm out of line here, please let me know. But I've been at this school for a while. I've seen all kinds of movies come through in and out of here. And I saw you and I heard you bad-mouthing yourself, like self-deprecating. And, I know you didn't mean anything, like you weren't being mean or anything like that, but you're a director. Your job is to not only tell a story, but to inspire people and get the best out of them, and to get them to do their best work. And if you don't have that confidence within yourself, you're never going to be able to do it with other people. And thinking about it now, I want to grab Robert Vaughn and hug him, which I think I did at the time. But it's so true what he said in that, to be a director, like you have to have that belief. And, and it's not arrogance. That's bad, because there are arrogant directors, but they usually get their comeuppance at a certain point, and it's not about the ego trip of being a director and I'm the guy or woman in charge and blah, blah, that's bullshit. Not directing has nothing to do with that, Mike. perspective. But you have to have, I think, that confidence in yourself and the story you're telling, because otherwise you're not going to be able to get 100 people on a set, or bigger movies, 1,000, to do the shot you need, or to tell the story you want to tell, or, to inspire someone like Matt Allen, who is busy and gets, high-paying studio gigs and not any films, to want to give 7-8 months, a year plus of his life to this little movie. You have to kind of, or get Ryan Phillippe to come to Utah in 18-degree weather. I mean, you got to really have that. So it's kind of a baseline requirement. And I would say to anyone who feels like maybe they don't have the story they wanted, or they have a story that, the story kind of also has to come to you. You have to be able to let that story in, because there's a lot of things that might seem appealing. I want to make a genre movie. I want to make this kind of movie. But I think knowing that something, when it comes from within, and then you have to kind of, I think, harness that. And then once you have that confidence in knowing, okay, this is the story I want to tell, and then you can bring that out of people. But it's hard if you don't have that feeling within yourself. That's kind of where it gets.
Yeah, there's about 1.5 million mic drop moments in there, which is really great insights. And the two that I really want to highlight that I think are really important is just kind of reiterating what you said, is that you knew you had this belief inside of you and you had to follow it. This is something that I experience all day, every day on a regular basis. When I have somebody text me or message me or call me saying, hey, we've got this big TV show. Are you available to edit it? Technically, yes. I'm available and I could cut it for you tomorrow, but I believe so wholeheartedly in the work that I'm doing now and building this program and getting my students and creating this curriculum. Short term is a checkers move. Like, this is kind of dumb. I'm turning away a lot of money. This is a lot of work. I'm basically throwing my money into a giant dumpster fire, trying to build a team around me to make it happen. But what I've told my team so many times is that I completely and totally believe in what we're doing. Right now, the process, it's kind of a shit show, because I'm trying to figure out how to do it, and we're making mistakes, and we're not as efficient as we could be, and we're not as effective as we could be. But I believe in the mission, and I believe in the larger direction that we're going. But the other mic drop moment that I think is an even bigger one, you can't get people to come along with you and believe in you until you believe in yourself first. I mean, you want to talk about a life-changing moment. It sounds like that was very much a life-changing mic drop moment for you.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's a great guy. He's someone who, he's absolutely. We showed him a cut of our movie, and he gave the best notes of like anyone. And you need people like that in your life who tell you the truth, also in a gentle way. He wasn't like saying, hey, he just came in and told the truth as we saw it. And it absolutely. I mean, it stayed with me. It stays with me all the time, because you can't, and when you're in a leadership position, I think it doesn't just apply to directing, but editing is a leadership position. Producing is a leadership position, photography, and how many jobs out there are leaders. I think to be a good leader, you have to have that. Otherwise, it's very hard to get people to come.
Yeah. Well, speaking of leadership and mentorship, this is going to be the segue to specifically roping Matt back into the conversation, because up until essentially the distribution phase, getting into festivals, trying to get people to notice you, getting yourself on podcasts and whatnot, I'm going to interject myself in the story at this point, just because that's the whole reason we're here today. But the importance of mentorship, the importance of guidance, and the importance of developing the skill of outreach is essential to the latter portion of your journey. So Matt, talk to me a little bit more about where the things that you learned throughout the program with me started to be brought into your project and getting it to where it is now. Specifically, the most important part is when Matthew was making fun of you for your outreach formula.
Yeah. So I think I was taking your class, and we were kind of getting to the advanced networking class, to be specific. And part of it was trying to work on getting my name out there, letting people know, as we talk about, that's like, yes, I've done a lot of assistant editing, but I can edit. And I think that's also a lot of that class is about mindset, how to interview well, asking really good questions in interviews to make sure that you are lining yourself up for a successful situation. And maybe not just going after any job, not doing this kind of spray and pray, like being very surgical. And I definitely, having the Eric Zumbrunnen Fellowship and having a lot of doors opened up, just kind of with the world I've lived in, kind of Hollywood studio system, of being able to cold outreach well really helped me in terms of gain mentorship, which was like even during my edit, like having people that I trusted that are working at a very high level watch our movie really helps, bar none. So that was one thing. Two is like you have to start forming relationships with people who are going to help promote your movie. And so one of the big things that we were doing is like, honestly, we were just asking lots of people because it was our first rodeo. It was like we were asking people who had submitted to film festivals for like, how do you do this? We were talking to programmers, and we weren't like going in as like, we have the most amazing movie ever. We were like, hi, we're trying to learn how to submit to film festivals well. Can we ask you a question or two? Even better, could I have permission to ask you a question or two? And that'll ring a big bells to people who've done the program. But I think kind of the big things of like learning is like, how do you cold outreach well? How do you create relationships with people? And I think oftentimes, you want to be an editor, you want to create relationships with other editors. And that's really important. And that's kind of what we also talk about in that class too, is like, you want to be talking to people that are 5 to 10 years ahead of you. You don't necessarily have to be talking to the person who won the Academy Award this past year, but people that they're an expert. If they're, 5 years ahead of you, that's an expert that you can learn a lot from. But besides editors, it's like, is there new up and coming directors that might be worthwhile that are maybe not a known entity that you might be able to create a bond with? I was fortunate that I went to AFI and I was able to like just be around people like Matthew. Like Matthew and I hadn't worked together ever until American Murder. So there was some convincing that had to happen. It wasn't like, oh yeah, this guy cut all my thesis films at AFI. He's my guy. It was like, he had to see my skills up close. And I had to believe that if I got an opportunity to work with him, that he might hire me. But the other thing too, was I think the big thing is like talking to PR people, programmers, just talking to other producers. I mean, we did some like interesting cold outreach just to other people that you're like, oh man, I don't think anyone's going to respond to this, but people would, because if you write a good cold outreach email, people will respond. And I think even better, it's like, all right, if you get to have that phone call or that like in-person meeting, it's like really value that person's time well, and come prepared, be on time, have good questions, be respectful of their time. And kind of the big thing that one of my mentors said to me early on, and I have to give him credit, Matt Chesse, that I try to do well as a mentee, but also when I am in a leadership position, is that kindness is not a line item in the budget. Like that for me is what I try to do every day when I'm like, if I'm sitting in the editing chair, when I've been in the assistant editing chairs, like if that's going to be the thing, that's my thing. At least when I try to walk into a room, is like there, you cannot put a price on that. And it's given freely. It's not because I'm on some certain project or I'm getting paid this amount of money, or I'm not getting this paid amount of money, or it's my passion project or not my passion project. That's what I want to lead with. And it's like, if you can lead with that all the time as either a mentor or a mentee, I think you're ahead of so many people in Hollywood, because most people don't operate like that.
Wow, I love it. I'm going to create an entire bumper sticker / t-shirt line that says kindness is not a line item in the budget. That easily in and of itself could be a 90-minute podcast conversation. But where I would like to go next, and this is my favorite part of the story, Matthew's first impressions of my outreach strategy. Tell me a little bit more about how this all evolved.
He made fun of me so much for this. Like, I remember starting, I'll let him go here in a second. He's laughing. But he made fun of me so much because I'm taking your class and I had done some cold outreach and I was seeing some results. I was talking to some people people had blown me off before, or people I felt really uncomfortable reaching out to, and I was getting responses. I was like, this works. Like providing value, knowing what your story is, and having a very clear-cut ask. Like, yes, this works. And I even had like the whole DeFresne technique pamphlet worksheet. And I texted to Matthew and he was like, this is the most silly, most nonsense. This doesn't work. You got to be kidding me. Like, are you actually paying for that class? Like, he was all over me. He razzed me for like 2 or 3 weeks. And I was like, just try it. Just try it. And he started trying it.
So yeah, let talk to me about that, Matthew. I'm very interested.
Well, I'm naturally a very skeptical person. And I'm usually not skeptical of things Matt Allen does. He's pretty logical and pragmatic. So I was like, but he told me about this class, and I was just like, I don't know, man. Like a class on how to write emails? Like, just write an email. Like, what do you want? And, but I was trying to get on people's maps and, get people to see our movie and whatnot, and wasn't getting as many responses as I hoped. Every now and then someone would look past the bad email I'd written and be like, oh, this looks kind of cool. But generally, once Matt really brought this to me and I realized, I consider what you do to be kind of almost like screenplay structure.
Mm-hmm.
But you're like the John Truby of it, meaning like John is the organic one, and he like tells you this is how you can do it, but he doesn't like prescribe a formula. Like I won't badmouth the other books, but yeah, bad screenwriting books out there say this is how you write a script, and you do act one, and you have your inciting, And
are you familiar, by the way, not to interrupt, but are you familiar with Chris Vogler and the writer's journey?
I haven't read him, but I heard he's amazing.
Yes. The reason I bring it up is because he talks about the hero's journey and broke it down into something simple. I literally just recorded a podcast with Chris Vogler 10 minutes before I got on with you guys, talking about the idea of how what we're doing is essentially learning how to tell our own story. And that's what you do in outreach. So I had to interrupt you just because the kismet of the fact that I recorded these two together and you said that, I just had to point that out.
Yeah, my girlfriend has that book in our apartment, and now I'm compelled to read because I've heard amazing things about it. And we're writing something together, and we talk about that. She talks about it a lot, and she's talking about. But yeah, I've heard he's great too. And yeah, I think that like what you do with emails, I consider like that. Where once Matt showed me, I mean, I laughed when I saw the phrase Dufresne technique because of Shawshank Redemption. But it really, once I started using it, and Matt showed me how to do it properly, I realized like how effective it is. And all it really is I see it now, having used it for about, and this is not a paid sponsorship, having used it for like the past, 6 months plus, is that it's not a formula and it's not a script. It's putting a little more thought and care into your writing when you approach someone.
Mm-hmm.
If there's any advice I could have for people, say that for me, when I started out, I would always want to meet people. I wanted to fucking meet everyone. Like, and my first job in the industry was working as an assistant at William Morris Endeavor. And, Ari Emanuel, the CEO of William Morris, used to say cold call, cold email. And it was a very good lesson I learned early to do that. And I would get responses. I would get people to sit with me. But what I didn't know at being a dumb 22-year-old was when you sit down with, say, like I got a chance to sit down with a big time, I won't name him, a TV director. And I could tell I was kind of annoying him because I was asking questions and whatever. And, he kind of looked at me and I saw on this guy's face, he was like, I want to help this guy, but I don't know how. And I think if you can figure out when you approach someone, whether it's an editor you want to work, whether someone you want to work with or someone you want to ask advice for, is figure out how they can help you before you approach them, because everyone's really busy. Everyone has a ton of things to do. In the case of like industry people, they have tons of scripts to read or movies to watch or screeners to get through. So, and you stress it in your work, which is, make sure you know what your ask is. If you're asking someone to sit down and read a 120-page screenplay, they're going to want to gag. But maybe they'll read 5 pages, right? So think about what you're asking someone, and I think all I think it is that I think it's not formula. I don't see it as that kind of thing. I think it's just putting more thought and care into how and when you approach people. But yeah, at first I made fun of Matt. Also, it's just kind of personalities.
I would make fun of it too. Let's just be perfectly honest.
Yoga though, and I'll be like, it's just how it is.
Yeah, but it's funny because it goes back to what you were talking about, where you just have to have a strong belief in what you're doing, because there are so many people that have the same reaction, like Like, I'm going to spend money to learn how to write an email. How stupid is that? Providing value, what does that even mean, right? But I have such a strong belief in the results that this gets, and the fundamental shift in mindset about how I believe all of us can interact and collaborate together and allow the tide to lift all of the boats instead of everybody just kind of clamoring and it's all about me and my success and my story. I don't believe Hollywood has to be that way anymore. And to me, this is one of those vehicles to get to, it's like, we're all going to lift each other up. And what I want to hit on here that's so important, and Matt, you can go into this even further, but you touched upon this, right? It's that people don't know how to help you, right? I always say over and over again, I'm like, if I'm going to sell a t-shirt or sell a poster, it would say it's not that people don't want to help you, it's that they don't know how to help you, right? And this process allows you to more clearly tell your story, which then in turn does provide value to another person. Because I firmly believe the majority of people in this industry do want to help other people. But we're so shit at communicating what we actually need. You're like, I don't know how to help you. And okay, fine. I guess I'll answer some of your questions, but I don't really have time because I'm busy, as opposed to I understand your journey. I was on your journey. I want to help somebody that was in a similar position. And you've made it clear how I can do that, which is actually more valuable to me. Right. So Matt, talk to me a little bit more about some of the results you've been able to get by making it clear how people could help you.
I mean, I think the big thing was like a lot of the outreach was, how do you get more editing opportunities, and talking with editors who maybe have 4 or 5 credits or at a kind of a mid-career. Some of them are, at the more kind of fully established, but for example, it's like when you talk to somebody, it's like, I'm not going to talk to them about their Academy Award winning film. Like, I'm not at that position yet, but I'm very interested in like, how would you get your first couple movies? Like, that's the part that where I'm in my journey, where I'm most interested is like, how do you start getting some momentum in that journey? And I think that's when you can, like, you're very focused, and someone can be like, oh yeah, this is what happened with me. And you can start to see similarities when you talk to multiple people. And you also, as you talked about, you get a level of empathy. You're like, oh yeah, I remember when when I was at the beginning of my career and I was still working on getting my first couple credits. I remember how hard that was. And so it's very like focused. If you're being very clear about where am I stuck? And you're asking those really honed in questions, not just like, oh, what editing software are you using? Or like, what's this? It's like asking really good questions, I think, will also bring about really good mentorship. And I think because people don't want a bad mentee and they don't have time for it. And most people don't want a mentee really either. They don't have like just the brain processing power for it. But I do think if you can cultivate mentorship type of relationships, and you talk about in your program, there's different types of mentors. And it's like knowing what that person can provide too. Is like, some people, they just don't have time. And that's okay. Some people do have some bandwidth, or you have similarities in your origin story that connect you more closely together, or you have people that you just have that synergy and you really worked well together. I mean, I was fortunate and I didn't really know who he was before he started teaching, but like a great example is like Matt Chesse, who I met at AFI. He came in for 1 year and he taught he was full time. He still has taught several years after that, but was mainly the department head at AFI for the 1 year I was in my final year at AFI. And we had worked on a movie at separate times, but we had worked on the same movie. And so I was like, okay, we have a credit in common. I knew some of his films, but we just like really hit it off. And I was helping him out. I was like, whatever this person needs, I'm going to help him out because this person has a lot of experience and I want to go where this person has been. And I will say, like, Matt's a really great teacher, but I felt like Matt taught in a way that was very differently than most people teach. Is like, it was purely osmosis. Most of the learning I've done from someone like that, and most of the learning I've done from great mentors, is not like they sit down with you and they teach you a lesson, or they're showing you this film and they're telling you what's awesome. Is you just have to watch, and you have to watch really well. And I felt like that's what Matt did, like during his year at AFI. Is like, you're just watching how he's handling things. You hear anecdotes, you hear stories, you hear how he's like talking about working with other department heads. He was great about giving us field trips and different things. And that was all part of that. It's like, how do you watch well when you're on the job? Like, if you're an assistant editor, you better be watching that editor. Well, how are they doing their job well? And sometimes it's not a good way. And I want to say that sometimes you're watching someone and you're like, ooh, I shouldn't do that. Or if I do that, this is what happens. So it's not always like you don't always have the positive role model. I've been fortunate that almost all of them have been positive, but occasionally you get those where they're not positive. And so you learn. So like, oh, when I'm in charge or I'm sitting in that chair, I want to deal with this differently, or I want to mirror what that person did. So I think that's kind of been a key for me in terms of like a lot of things that we've talked about in the program was like, how do you mirror the traits that you want to become? Because it's like, I think that's really important. It's like you have to have good process and then the results will come. And I think you've talked about that with me a lot sometimes as being a student. It's like there are things you control and there's things you can't control. And it's knowing when you goal set, what are those things that you can control and what are the things that are outside of, of your potential opportunity. It's like you can't, as an editor, Matthew has this luxury that I don't have. He can sit down and write a script. That's not what I'm personally interested in. He's very good at that. He's a really good screenwriter. And so he can start a movie. My job and my skill set is a finisher. So I'm not looking to, start a movie from scratch and direct it so I have a movie to edit. So you can do all these things well, have good process, but there is like and I've had really high-end editors tell me this, you're not fully in control. You have to be prepared to be in the right place and then take advantage of that opportunity. So it's not luck. It's about putting yourself in the right places and then being prepared to take advantage of that opportunity. And American Murder really felt like that for me. And I felt like I was able to channel a lot of things I'd been learning for many years as a studio assistant editor and bring that level of professionalism down to like an indie level. Because when you're working at indie level, you don't have all these safeguards that you have at a studio level. And everything's not on the rails, and there's not like a super tight, schedule. It's like, you got to have to impose that structure on the project that you're doing. And I feel like that was something I was able to do. And I have to give credit to Matthew for allowing me to like have so much creative control and that he was trusting. I also just have to give a shout out to like all the other department heads, Clear, cinematographer, Scott, who's a musical virtuoso, like amazing musician that we were able to collaborate so well together and do a score fully remote during the middle of a pandemic. I think what a great part of filmmaking is that, and I felt this on American Murder, and I want to try to take this with me, is when you get a film in the can, I think as an editor, you feel like this sense of responsibility to like everybody who just like sacrificed themselves on a film set. Because I don't like being on the film set, but they had their blood, sweat, and tears on that film set. Matthew's been writing this film for how many years? And then I got to take it to the finish line. But then I have all these other people with me in post-production, like Scott, his brother, like our sound mixer, colorist, all the other people on our team. And you feel a sense of responsibility to finish it well. Because all these people, they're not, particularly a project like this, they're not doing it for the money. This isn't like, oh, great. It's not Netflix or Amazon or Hulu or whatever, where they're able to just like spend tons and tons of money. It's not that situation where it's like a huge studio movie. People are doing it because they see your passion and they sense that you are going to take this somewhere special. So I feel like that sense of responsibility, I do not want to lose.
Well, good for you. I appreciate the fact that you understand that role, and I have no doubt that you and I are going to be having a conversation in give or take 5 or 10 years where you're holding your Oscar and everybody's saying it's the next Thelma Schoonmaker. I mean, just the dead ringer, uncanny resemblance. I want to come back to you to finish up talking a little bit more about next steps and the clarity of goals, because you and I had a really interesting conversation yesterday, at least as far as when we recorded today's conversation, that I think at least shedding a little bit of light on that for the people listening would be helpful. But I want to put a pin in that for a second, because I want to go back to you now, Matthew, and I want to go back to this idea of the very specific tangible results that you have seen from doing the right kinds of cold outreach for the film specifically, or for the next steps in your journey.
Well, I think I appeared on 30 plus podcasts, or more. I think actually 60. I did 30 film related, and I did like 20 true crime related. So, 50 interviews booked without hiring a publicist for $5,000 a month. So that's what that would have cost easily, and they would have probably gotten me not even like maybe a tenth of those. So, and that's to count the monetary value is not really what's important here. It's really factoring in. It's also the relationships built. We use that cold outreach to build relationships with festivals. The festival that gave us our world premiere at Taormina in Sicily, where we got to have our world premiere in June, and the film premiered in the theater built in 300 BC, and we got to meet Francis Ford Coppola. And had I not had the courage to look up the head of the festival and write them and ask, hey, will you look at my film? Now, look, I could have just submitted it on the same thing that everyone else does, but something and when Matt brought your cold outreach to me, it was sort of like he poured gasoline onto a fire. In that I've always been big on reaching out to people. I've always been big on taking initiative. I've always had no issue with that. That's not something that's hard for me. And I know it's hard for a lot of people. And I do understand. I do understand that it can be hard and scary and whatever. But the fact is, it's just like so many people just won't do it. And I even noticed from the few times I've guest lectured at classes, I've guest lectured at film schools and colleges occasionally. And I always give out my website. And I'm going to do it right now in your podcast. I always give out my website, MatthewGentileDirector.com. I'm not hard to find. Like, you can always message me if you want to ask me a question. I might take some time, but I'll get back to you. I've had mentors who can always get back to me, so I always have to get back to people when they reach out to me. And I have a couple, but I'm just always amazed how very rarely do people actually write. Like maybe one or two will here and there. And I just don't know why, because it's just so easy, and here's a resource. And so I think the cold outreach just taught me how to really focus and connect. And, as a result, Matt, I could say that Matt and I together with, targeting where we wanted to go with this movie. And, it applies to everything. Film festivals we played at were due to relationships that we built. Podcasts and shows, video interviews I appeared on, CrimeCon, all were because of relationships that we built. And so, when you're at this phase in your career, when you're in any phase of your career, but when you're at a young starting out phase in your career, it is all about relationships. People getting on the phone and picking up and saying, oh yeah, I know this person, or I know that person. You should talk to this person. And I think, if I can credit the cold outreach for anything, it's that it's opened up such a wide breadth of context that I now have that I wouldn't have otherwise if I had just not done it or hoped that people would find me. Going out and just building these connections has allowed me to, now when I go to my next film and when we're finished with that and we're promoting it and putting it out into the world, we're going to have 50 podcasts we can hit up, no problem, and we're going to have festivals. We can just be like, hey, you want the movie? And we're going to have, people who might want to do a story on us. And so it's about building relationships. And I think that's what I think cold outreach has allowed me to do is, and why it's so important is that it allows you to overcome that, hesitation. Because look, there's no harm. Nothing can happen. You write me and I don't want to talk to you. Nothing's going to happen. You're just writing me an email. Like, I'm not going to, as long as it's a nice email. No, it's like, you could write, I've written letters to, Martin Scorsese before. I haven't heard back, but, one day he'll respond, and you just keep going. So I think it's just, overcoming that and not letting that hold you back, because there really is there's no consequence. We wrote to the head of Cannes. He didn't respond, but maybe he will on the next, on our third one. Who knows? Our second one. So I think just, learning that and learning how to be targeted and learning how to, use your time well, but also not waste people's time, right? Like, have a specific thing you want and need, and, and look to connect and not have such an ulterior motive. And I think that's where a lot of people get tripped up. A lot of people think so. Networking is, and I don't really like the word networking. I always found it kind of weird. What does networking really mean? I just think it's like getting to know people, getting to connect, and getting to have experiences,
Yeah, couldn't agree with that more. And what I always tell my students is that I cannot guarantee that if you reach out to somebody that you'll get a response. But I can 100% guarantee that if you don't reach out, the answer is no.
Right.
Right? It's always going to be no, and you're not going to get a response if you don't reach out. So why not just try? Right?
Yeah. What do you don't have anything to lose,
Mm-hmm.
You really don't. I mean, I could say to Matt, and Matt, we're going to share a story. It's a little personal here, but the first batch of reviews for our movie weren't very positive when it was released. The week it came out, we got these there's these kind of this group of critics that kind of comes after VOD movies, and they fucking they attacked us. They went on us. And they massacred. Right. And this was when the movie was winning awards and getting some good reviews. And then this group just fucking went. And so, we kind of had a talk, Matt and I were like, well, we're a movie. That's it. We didn't have a huge marketing spend. We're not going to get 100 or 200 or 300 critics to watch this movie like a Marvel movie does or a studio movie does. So what do we do now? Do we sit here and watch our baby get massacred or just accept that this part of the process wasn't what we wanted? Or do we give it a shot? And do we write some critics and see if they'll just watch the fucking thing? What do we have to lose? And since then, and it's not all about scores, but our score jumped up tremendously. And by the way, the critics who ended up responding to our well-crafted email, asking them to possibly take the time to watch this film in a busy season, said, I could hate your movie, to me, in other words. I might hate your film. I'll watch it if you want me to. And I said, please do. And the reviews did get better. And then there were some who didn't, but, it got it more covered. And it got, and that's just the thing is at first I had a lot of hesitation. I was saying to Matt, I was like, why? I don't know. It's out of our hands now. The movie's done. And Matt said, what do you have to lose? And that's the message I would send on is when it comes to reaching out to somebody, if you were doing it politely and if you were doing it mindfully and you aren't trying to waste their time, you really have nothing to lose. If you're coming in and you're saying hey, read my 120-page script or watch my cut right now, you're probably going to get laughed at and they're going to delete it. But if you come in mindfully and say, hey, I'm this person, I'm on my journey, I need some help. Can you help me? A little bit, give me 5 minutes of your time. That's all. And you're polite and you're mindful and you're respectful about it. The worst case scenario is they won't respond. And the best case scenario, and it often happens, is they do get back to you and they say, I can help you or I can't. So, yeah.
Well, I'm going to add to my t-shirt line, and the t-shirt now, in addition to, kindness is not just a line item in the budget. What have you got to lose? Giant question mark. I think that's yet another great mic drop moment for sure. And where I want to leave the conversation, I want to go back to you, Matt, because I think this is really, really important. Understanding the nuance of telling your story and where you are in your journey to get people to better help you. And you and I had a private conversation about this yesterday. And I like to talk a little bit more about the aha moment that you had in understanding it's not just outreach and I'm asking a question or I want to grab coffee and pick your brain, but the magic in this is really in understanding the nuance of telling my story and where I'm really stuck. What was the aha moment that you and I had together yesterday?
The aha moment was that I think there was a couple things, but really that you can only be in control of so many things. I think it's we talked about good process. It's yes, you can be doing good cold outreach, but sometimes you don't even know where you're stuck. And I think one thing we talked about is I got to have this great opportunity of working with Matthew, but there's also a perception of oh, you guys went to AFI together. So you cut your buddy's movie. You didn't have a studio bet on you. All our distribution happened afterwards. We basically played film festivals. We got our distribution. We had some cool companies come on, and then we got out into the world. So there was a part of where me being stuck of getting more editing opportunities is that, oh, I didn't have a big studio take a risk on you. So that's a part of as we talk about the elephant in the room of a part of I didn't realize where I was stuck. I think also a cool point to highlight as well is we talked about goal setting well of how you outreach well of that, you can have a goal of yes, I want to land this next job or next thing, but as we've said before, like you're not in fully control of that because you're an editor and you're looking for a project. You can't fully manifest that. You can have good process, you can put yourself in the right position, but you can only control like how well you're reaching out to people, what type of people you're building relationships with, and then you just have to be prepared. And you can't, if you're all of a sudden not maybe getting the offers that you want, or you're not hearing about things, it doesn't mean that you have bad process. There has to be an opportunity that lines up with you being prepared. So I think that was another like aha moment in terms of good goal setting. And also sometimes you don't realize where you're stuck.
Yeah. And I think ultimately, if I'm going to break that down and simplify even further, which gets both very specific and very broad in general, that I firmly believe, and I'm not the first one to say it, many others have said it, but the quality of your life is largely dictated by the quality of the questions that you ask. And in your case, the question that you were asking where you thought you were stuck was, I've gotten my first credit. How do I get over the hump of getting my second? Because everybody says, oh, the second is harder than the first. And you were asking the wrong question because the perception might be, not necessarily, but it might be, how do I get my first studio credit? Because technically you got a studio film, but the perception is, yeah, but was it really your first movie? I mean, you did it with your buddy and you guys kind of willed it into existence, but you didn't deal with the studio notes process and executive producers and all those other things. So you're in a way kind of asking the wrong question. How do I get my second big studio movie? It's how do I get my first big studio movie, which by the way, changes the people that you connect with and the mentors that you surround yourself with, does it not?
Totally. So it makes your outreach a lot more, I would say a lot more focused, and it makes your questions, which brings it back to that, your questions a lot more focused of what you're asking, and asking people about what their journey was and what advice they can add to you.
Exactly. So the final place we're going to leave this is an exercise that I don't do at the end of every episode. There are some podcasters that ask the exact same questions at the end of every episode. Doesn't matter who their guests are, what the topics are. I'm not a big believer in that, but I do have a stock question that I like to ask specific when it's to people's journeys and inspirational journeys and overcoming a lot of limiting beliefs and obstacles. So I'm going to start with you, Matthew. If we were to rewind to the darkest portion of this film's journey, where you weren't really sure, is this ever going to be a thing? Can I make this happen? And maybe for you, that moment never even existed, but think to early in the journey. I want you to time travel back to yourself. What advice do you give now that you've gone through this entire process once?
Well, there definitely was a part of the journey. I would tell that person 29, there was a point in 2019 where it looked like it just might not get off the ground. And I would say that a dark night of the soul, if you will. And I would say to that person, buckle up, because you're going to get that a million times. You think a dark night of the soul is a dark, like, no, it's not going to happen. Is when there's so many points of the film's process where you're just going to feel, even when you do get it, you're completely drained. Like you don't have anything left in you. Like maybe when you finish shooting, you're like, now I have to go edit. And when you edit, I have to go out there. Now I have to distribute it. Now I have to do the press it. Now I have to, and then it eventually does just end. But I would just say to also take the time to accept that it's a process. And it's not always about nailing it. And it's not always about, it takes time. This process of filmmaking is so complex and there's so many moving parts. So, I would say to that self 3 years ago, I guess, it was, this is going to get made. I would say, we know now it did. So it's going to get made. So now how do you better prepare? What do you learn? What do you take along? How do you better position yourself, prepare yourself to take that leap, to take that next step? And not be too tough on oneself. I think that's, I'm sure you've dealt with that based on my conversations with you, that for ambitious types, and just artistic and creative types, I think we can be very hard on ourselves. And, I think being kind to oneself in that process and giving yourself the space to do what you need to do and to let the process be and take it.
I love it. Matt, you're going to be jumping in a time machine into a different moment because you have a different journey and path as Matthew. But if you're going to jump back into a time machine where at one of those darker moments where you may have been doubting yourself, whether it's during this film or it was when you were 19 years old, wondering if you're ever going to even go to AFI, whatever it might be, what's the moment and what's the advice that you're going to give yourself?
The moment, let's think. I think the moment, there's kind of like two moments I can think of that they're very similar, because I think the feeling was being overwhelmed. I think getting into AFI was very much a feeling of overwhelmed, because at the time I got rejected from a lot of other grad schools that were not as good as AFI. And so I thought, I'm going to do something different, or I thought I was going to go down another career path. And then I got into AFI. So there was definitely a overwhelming joy, and also overwhelming like, okay, this is going to be rough. It's going to be a rough 2 years. And it was a very rough there was huge highs and lows in those 2 years at AFI. And then I think the other one is booking my first big studio job is like, all right, this is real. Like, you wanted to do this, and now you gotta do this. And the expectations are there, regardless if it's your first time or not. And I think if I would go back in time, I would just say, surround yourself with good people. I think that's really what changes the course of your direction in life and where you want to go, is the people you surround around you. I think that matters so much, of the people that you're seeking advice, the people that will support you, the people that you can call when you're having a bad day. I think those people, regardless if they're working creatively with you or they're just part of your emotional support system, I think surrounding yourself with really good people is game changing and life changing. So I think that would be my advice, because you're not meant to, even as an editor, you do a lot of time alone. I think the reason why filmmaking is so special, maybe compared to other art forms, it is collaborative. It is a team thing, and you do, win and die as a team. It's a team sport, and life's that way too. So you might as well find a great team and have them, and come alongside them and come alongside other people well. So that's the advice I would give myself.
Man, for two young up and coming filmmakers, you sure know a lot about life and business and filmmaking, and there's just a multitude of these mic drop moments everywhere. Wise beyond your years, both of you. Matt and Matthew, this has been an absolute pleasure. I'm glad that you guys consistently, very politely, but very consistently, were good with your outreach and getting in front of me and telling your story such that I could see the value and we could get you on the microphone and we could share this story with my audience. And I think you brought a lot of value today, which I know was the purpose. And I hope that we brought a little value to you in return. So if anybody, most importantly, the whole reason we're here is shameless self-promotion. Where can people watch this movie that we keep talking about?
They can watch it on Amazon, iTunes, Apple, all digital platforms. Anywhere you can rent a movie, you can rent American Murder digitally. It's coming to DVD and Blu-ray December 13th. Makes for a fun Christmas present.
Nice.
My last message is listen to Zack Arnold and hire Matt Allen.
I love it. We're gonna have to make that the cold open. Talk about good promotion for both of us. I can attest to firsthand that whatever the cost may be at the time, you will be making a wise investment watching American Murderer. I watched it, really, really enjoyed it. The only thing that's really weird and very insider baseball is that I could not get past the fact that Ryan Felipe and Chantal were brother and sister instead of married, because I spent 3 years working on Shooter and they were married, and I could not get those characters out of my head. Right? I kept waiting for her to call him Bob Lee. Right. But what? So it was a very weird personal experience for me, because I feel so connected to them, even though I've never met either of them in person. But to see them as brother, sister, I was like, this is weird. But that was just my own personal experience. It was really, really well done. I never would have guessed. Number one, super low budget. You can tell it wasn't $50 million, but it didn't feel like super low budget, shoestring budget. But it also did not feel like a first time filmmaker.
Thank you.
So it's really well done, and it was a great, great film. And I can wholeheartedly endorse that it's worth your hour and 40 minutes and the $7 or $10 or whatever it is. Totally worth it. Really enjoyed it. So you guys did a great job.
Thank you. Thank you.